Hey, man.
Hey, what's up, man?
What do you got going on today?
Not much work. The girls have cheer, normal stuff.
Yeah. Are you getting into crypto? Have you gotten any crypto?
I got some. I bought some Shiba Inu coins back when they were super cheap. I got a million of those, but that's about it.
I got into it. I got XRP and Shiba and Zombie Inu, which is really cool.
Yeah.
And and I've actually made a little bit.
Little scratch, little coin.
Coin. Probably said that wrong, but anyways, I made a little coin on it, and
nice.
I want to pull some profits out, as they like to say, and check it out. But I got some anxiety on the taxes. You got any tips?
Oddly enough, I do, man. Bear tax covers all that tax stuff for cryptocurrency, as far as profit and loss and gains and how to report it, all that kind of stuff over at Bear.tax.
That's crazy. Do they have any APIs for my wallets?
Dude, they do. Once you sign up over on Bear.tax, you get an account there. You can either import things and get a really easy CSV upload, or you can, a lot of crypto wallets and exchanges have as a direct API integration. You can just connect it and pull it in.
That's awesome. So it's kind of like taking all of my guesswork out so that I can alleviate my anxiety.
Taking a lot of that out of there for you to make it to where you can just go buy your crypto and live in that fake world of money.
Yeah, I'm scared because I'm always scared that I'm going to either pay too much taxes or I'm going to get hit with a huge bill.
Yeah, I mean, and with doing it this way, you just do it right once and be done with it.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm going to go check out Bear.tax then.
Cool, man.
In a world of podcasts, one rises in the night to destroy them all. The elder god in an ocean of noise, the Cthulhu of the airwaves. This is Spoiler Country.
Hey everybody, welcome again to another episode of Spoiler Country. Today on the show, we have author of Gamora and Nebula, Sisters in Arms, Mackenzie Lee. Mackenzie, how you doing?
I'm so good. I'm so happy to be talking to you.
I'm stoked. I've read your book. I loved your book. I had a blast reading it, and my 10-year-old daughter also read it with me, which was fun. It's a little bit older.
That makes me really happy.
But, she dug it. So I can't wait to get into this and talk with you about the book and your prior writing and all that other stuff. First off, how you been? You had a good day so far?
Yeah, today's been good. It's been punishingly hot where I am, as it has been, I think, in most places in the country. But we got some rain last night, and today was actually cool enough that I could go outside with the dog and walk dog, not at either midnight or 5 a.m. So we had like a normal dog walk today. That was pretty great. That's as soon as I get home from work, I take the dogs for a walk. And today this is boring, but tore down my deck last week, and we had a concrete patio board. And I've been preparing all that stuff and getting my grill stuff set up. So I looked at my phone. I said, holy crap, I got an interview in 30 minutes and I look like Pigpen from Peanuts. So I jumped in the shower real quick and now I'm here. So we're a good pair though, because I didn't prepare for video. So I'm just like hanging out in my apartment, no makeup, totally fine.
I'm so sorry.
I said it. No, it's totally. I didn't have to turn on my video if I didn't want to. It's just funny because I've been doing press for this book for a couple of weeks, and so I've had a couple of weeks of like getting just like not obscenely dressed up, but way more dressed up than I've gotten in a year and a half to just sit in my apartment and do interviews. But part of it is like, it's part of the presentation of it, and it's fun. I like getting dressed up, and I haven't got to do it in a long time. And I looked at my calendar though, and I was like, oh, a podcast today. I don't have to dress up for a podcast. This is like the first time in weeks that I haven't been dressed up for an interview.
Well, you look great, and the background is cool. So we're gonna rock and roll with this.
We're doing okay.
So Mackenzie, you've done a lot of writing in YA for, I don't know, you've done quite a few books. How long have you been at it, like as a professional writer?
So my first book came out in 2015, and I was in grad school for 2 years before that. I was studying history before that with the intention of someday getting a PhD, and then kind of got rerouted into writing historical fiction because I was told my writing didn't really suit a serious academic historical voice. and I couldn't like do things like write dialogue for Richard III or like imagine scenes where Henry V was like, I wrote about the Wars of the Roses. That's why I'm pulling all these examples. Well, he wasn't really an esteemed historian, more of a historical fiction writer too.
So yeah. I think it paid off for everybody because what you're doing is awesome and
definitely comparable to Shakespeare. So.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I can see a little bit of some of that high drama. And,
truly my only peer.
I agree. And I'm going to say the Gamora and Nebula. I mean, very much in that line of drama and high intrigue. So, holy smokes. You started off with all this historical fiction stuff, and then you ended up writing a book for Marvel about Loki.
Yeah.
How did that?
So through lots of good luck and timing and being in the right place at the right time, essentially, the editor who I first worked with at Marvel had been pitching for some time. And this is how often these projects happen. I think lots of people don't know how these sort of franchise novels or comics and things get generated or like where they come from. And so how it happened with mine is that the editor who first acquired me had been pitching for several years in-house. She was an editor for Marvel. She'd come up with this idea of doing a YA fiction series about some of your favorite Marvel anti-heroes as teenagers and sort of doing origin stories for them and seeing them earlier in their timeline than we've seen them before in comics or films or anything. And because of that sort of unique positioning, she wanted them to have a historical bend to them. And she finally got this project approved, and they said, you can go out and hire a writer. And right when she was looking for a writer, my book, The Gentleman's Guide to Vice and Virtue, had just come out and was getting a lot of press. And so she picked it up and read it and said about halfway through, she emailed my agent and was like, this is who I would love to be writing my Marvel series. And so I got an email from my agent that said, hypothetically, would you be interested in writing for Marvel? And I said, this better not be hypothetical, because that would be the meanest trick you'd ever play. And so yeah, awesome. It was a lot of right place, right time. And then she kind of, they came to me with this broad outline of saying, we're going to do 3 books, 3 anti-heroes, 3 different sort of Marvel. And they didn't even have all the characters outlined. The first one, they said, we want to do Loki for the first one. Then the other 2, let's wait and sort of decide later, depending on who's popping and what's hitting and if there's any sort of like standout characters. And so when it came time to talk about the second book, I think Infinity War, one of the Infinity Endgame, one of the big last ones had just come out. And so Gamora and Nebula both were sort of having this moment within the Marvel fandom because they both had really sort of poppy arcs in both those films. And so we ended up settling on them for the second book.
That's awesome. What was your experience with comics prior to getting in with Marvel and writing Loki?
So I was a nerd when I was a kid, and I was a nerd in an age when it was not cool to be a nerd. So I spent a lot of my childhood trying to hide that fact. And I remember as a kid desperately wanting to be a comic book reader and desperately wanting to be into comics and just having no idea how to do that. And there was like one comic book shop I knew of that was by my grandma's house. And I remember going in there and it was all like low lighting and it's crowded and it's tiny and it's all full of like men in their 40s. And I just like everything about this place was telling like teenage me, like, this is not for you. Like, you don't belong here. And I would pick up these comics and be like, oh, okay. So I know who Wonder Woman is. Maybe I'll read this one, and would pick it up and be like, I don't know what's happening. I'm in the middle of a story. Like I literally did not know how to read comics. I didn't have any resources. I was too scared to ask all those intimidating comic book shop men. And so I just kind of I wasn't ever that kind of a nerd. I was really into Star Wars. I was really into like fan fiction and things like that, with very secretly though. I never told anybody. And then as an older human, I guess, that's not the way we phrase that, as an adult, phrase that in the weirdest way possible.
I'm an older human.
An older human. I do everything possible to avoid recognizing that I'm an adult now. But as an adult,
it's rough.
Terrible. Facing reality is hard. As an adult, the Marvel movie started coming out. And so like many people, I suddenly had, because of the films, an access point, and I had a critical foundationary understanding of who these characters were and how they related to each other and where they fit sort of in the wider universe. And so I was able to become a comic book reader, both because the movies made the characters accessible to me and also because comics in general have just become a lot more accessible. And we're having conversations about inclusion and representation, both in terms of the characters and the readership. There's more visual literacy is more of a conversation, especially in like the children's book world and among graphic novel readers. And so changes in the modern world have allowed me to be a comic book reader. But I was not one as a kid. I was not a Marvel kid in spite of how much I wanted to be.
I hear you. And yeah, I think one problem with comics in general, and I think they're finally starting to address it through like having focus on like miniseries and stuff like that. Another YA author, Marian Gu, recently did a miniseries for Silk, which is a Spider-Man character, and it's been popping off as really good. But the great thing about it is it's self-contained. It's all you need to know is in the book that she's writing. So all you have to have are those 6 issues or this one book, and you're good. Whereas if you're a new reader, in the 90s when I was a kid, you would be burdened with over 30 years of backstory. And that can be intimidating.
And I would go into feeling, and I still feel this way sometimes when I talk to people who are like Marvel people, or the few times I've been able to speak at Comic-Con, I always feel like at some point somebody's going to like quiz me and be like, okay, so you wrote Loki, but but what do you think of this Al Ewing arc in the 5th issue of volume 17 of Young Avengers? And can you talk about and I feel like somebody's going to like check my credibility, deem me not enough of a fan to be here, whether as a fan or as a writer, and then kick me out of the club. And I think I had that as a kid too, whereas I felt sort of like, if I don't know this whole world, and even if I don't go in with a foundational knowledge, I felt like I'm never going to catch up.
So do you mind if I ask, how did you get into...
I thought you were gonna ask like, do you mind if I ask, what do you think of Al Ewing's arc of Loki in volume?
The fact that you brought up Al Ewing and Young Avengers, I'm...
Okay. You're not gonna take my card.
Heck no. No, you're a writer and this is what you do. But how did you get into Nebula and Gamora? Like, how did you do the research? Did you go back and read all the comics? What did you pull from?
Well, they're interesting characters because Loki, you have not only the history in Marvel, but you have then 10,000 years of mythology and history and all these writers who have contributed to his narrative and his story. And also Loki stayed because he had this mythology background, he stayed a pretty consistent character in Marvel in terms of he's always Thor's brother, he's always the trickster god, he's always usually got the horn helmet. Like there's things about Loki that don't change. Whereas Nebula and Gamora are characters that came out of this like weird 70s space age of Marvel comics, and the versions of them that originated look totally different than the versions most people know, and those are the versions from the films. And the oh gosh, I wish I could remember her name, the woman who wrote the Guardians of the Galaxy screenplay with James Gunn, really like redeveloped these characters and created sort of a new backstory for them and a new current identity in the timeline. And so reading backwards, I found didn't actually help me that much because it's kind of been retconned now that Marvel's sort of rewriting history to match Nebula and Gamora to who most people know them as because of the film. And so I read some comics for this. I also learned though with Loki, because like I said, there's so much, and I was so worried about being like an authority on the subject and feeling like I knew enough, that I tried to read absolutely everything that was out there. And then tried to, well, not only tried to read it, I then tried to absorb it all and then incorporate it into the book somehow. And so I realized at some point that my biggest barrier with Loki was I was working so hard to make my Loki an amalgamation of the poetic Ada's Loki and Al Ewing's Loki and Stan Lee's Loki and Tom Hiddleston's Loki and Tumblr's Loki. And I was going to smash them all together. And then there's no room then for any sort of creative freedom, and it's very stifling. And I've had to just like learn and accept that I got hired to write my version of these characters too, and that my ideas are why I've been brought to the table. It's not sort of in spite of them. It's not to just draft off or copy what other people have done. So I did less reading this time around, partly because there was less to do, but also partly because I kind of learned the hard way that overdoing your research can be kind of crippling in a way I didn't expect.
That's the smart way to go about it. And especially just having that assurity that they wanted a Mackenzie Lee book first and foremost. Mm-hmm. They wanted you to write this book. And so, yeah.
Well, and one of the coolest things I found about writing for Marvel is that first of all, I work with a lot of people who do know every reference to everything ever. So I'll sit in these pitch meetings with people and I'll say like, I've been thinking about doing something with Space Church and like maniacal Space Church. And somebody will pop out and be like, well, actually, there already exists in the Marvel canon the Universal Church of Truth, which is led by the Matriarch, and Adam Warlock and Gamora actually have a history with them. So it'd be a really fun call. And I just kind of go, okay. And they're like, we'll send you. And they have like encyclopedia pages where they're like, here's everything we know that's been in the comics about the Universal Church of Truth. Here's every they have like bibliographies with here's every time they appear in the comics, every time they're referenced. And so it can be helpful when you don't have to do the reading because someone just like sends you the spark notes.
Oh yeah. And I actually had a question that pertained to that.
Segue.
Yeah. So you did it looked like a ton of world building within this book. How open was Marvel to let you explore and build these new worlds, like the mining colony and all that other stuff?
They were super open. I honestly went into this project thinking and being totally fine with like, okay, so they'll give me an outline. I'll have to write off this outline. Maybe once in a while I'll get to like write my own quips that I won't get to bring a lot to the table. And they really were incredibly open and collaborative. And I think it helps that they are, like you said, they're contained stories and they're contained books. So they kind of everybody has to come out without any, like I couldn't rewrite things in that, like, I don't know, Gamora can't lose both her legs and her head at some point and get them replaced with like a Barbie head. Like, I don't know, like that was a terrible example. So it's a little bit of just like, it's like a monster of the week kind of episode rather than something that's going to be fitting into a larger story. And so because of that, there's a ton of freedom. And so with Gamora and Nebula, well, let's back up. With Loki, we knew we wanted to do a historical setting, and they sort of brought, because Loki's timeless and he lives, I mean, we had so many conversations about how Asgard years relate to human years. And if we say Loki's 118, does that mean he's 60? Like, nightmares. Didn't know I was going to have to do Asgardian age math when I signed up for this project.
Are you aging Loki in dog years? Is that how you...
It felt like it sometimes. Trying to like work backward and do the formula. That's why I was not a math major. But so we had talked about, Loki's timeline's different. So we can have placed him in other parts of the human timeline and of the Asgardian timeline. And so we sort of talked from the start. They brought me a couple of time periods and they said, what if we put him in like Game of Thrones, medieval? What if we put him in the 1920s? What if we put him in Victorian England? And that was the one I latched onto. And they kind of came with these specific time periods because they were like, we want to do something that's recognizable, that has like a pop culture presence. So people aren't going to be like, I'm sorry, what is Loki doing in like the 1630s Dutch tulip mania? Like, people have some sort of context for the wider historical time period around him. So you don't have to spend so much time doing historical world build. And I latched on to Victorian England because there were a bunch of things I wanted to write about in that time period, like spiritualism and fake mediums and these like death clubs that existed and these trains full of dead people. Like, it for me, I was like, yeah, this is what I want to do. With Gamora and Nebula, I went in with a much more clean slate because they don't exist in the human world at all. And so we knew we were going to do a sci-fi one with kind of a historical sensibility to it. So I went in saying, I want to do a space Western. I love Firefly, I love Dune, I love Mad Max. Like, I want to draft off these things that I already love. I grew up in Utah, and so I spent a lot of time in like the Red Rock and down with sort of the myth of the American cowboy and on these ranches and things like that. And then as I got older, ended up sort of deconstructing and starting to recognize how many people had to be exploited and walked all over and ignored in order for this myth of the American cowboy to exist. And so this is what I brought to Marvel, was like, let's write about exploitation in the old American West. And I want to talk about mining and environmentalism and the way religion preys on vulnerable populations. And shockingly, they were like, yeah, let's do it. So a lot of my
they totally like just let you go nuts on this. And I loved it.
There's so much in it that I remember, not the least of which is most of the dialogue for the Grandmaster, who's a character in it. There was so much that I wrote into the first draft that I was like, well, obviously they're going to make me take this out, but I'm going to see like how, just like put it in there, see what I got away with so much, like so many things. It's always the things you don't expect them to have an issue with are always the things they flag. And I'm like, really, you want to talk about this and not about the like joke about pop tabs. Like, okay, that's fine, whatever.
So some of it even made me think of like the Battle of Blair Mountain in regards to the miners, causing a ruckus and stuff. And that I really loved that, the historical parallels that you had, like the Old West and the struggles that the miners had. What was the inspiration for you to have mining as a plot point in the book? I know it's all very sci-fi, but did you do any research into the actual mining practices or the effects, like the effects of chromacite? Is that how you say it?
Yeah. I don't know. I've never said that word out loud. I've only ever written it.
Well, the effects of the substance they're mining on the miners were pretty gruesome. Did you do any research into the health conditions like black lung, asbestosis, thyroid damage, etc., caused from the mining here on Earth? Was that any inspiration?
I did, actually, shockingly. So my grandfather on my mother's side was a miner and died from a lot of things, but died before I was born, in part from complications.
COPD and stuff like that.
It's due to working in mines. And again, grew up in Utah. There's a ton of mining is so much a part of the not the culture, that's the wrong word, the history here. And like there's old silver mines, and I've gone down in like abandoned mine shafts totally legally as a kid. And I also have my dad he works for a power company, and he oversees power plant construction. And so we've talked a lot about coal energy versus like solar energy in our family, because we're very cool, great dinner table conversations. But these are all kind of things that I had that were in my brain and sort of existed within me. And then I ended up diving deeper and read about, like you said, I read about some of the Old West mining and things like mining tunnel collapses, and even like the coal mining. There's a book when I worked for a university press for a short time as an intern, and one of the books I like proofread for them was a book called Coal in Our Veins, that was a history of, I think it was primarily Welsh immigrants coming to the West to mine. It was like one of those very, very niche university press historical books. And I was fascinated by it. Like I read it like 2 or 3 times and ended up like purchasing a copy afterwards. And so I referred to things like that. And then also was reading about like the strip mining that happens in places like, especially over in like Appalachian in North Carolina. There's a lot of issues. West Virginia, that's Kentucky. Places, all those places. And I think we don't realize the toll even like harvesting, that's the wrong word, creating clean energy, what we perceive as being clean energy. And so many of the things that we perceive as being environmentally friendly or organic or what have you, there's still so much abuse of the planet behind that. There's still so much exploitation of workers and of people. Like there's still a lot of nastiness behind the scenes.
Oh yeah.
Which is not to say, this is I always have to like pause my diatribes about environmentalism and be like, this is a super fun book. It's a Western. There's big
It really was.
It's really fun. It's just also about like strip mining and the dangers of that.
If you've ever seen the aftermath of strip mining, it is freaking heartbreaking. As an aside, my great grandfather was a safety inspector for mines here in Alabama. And when I was a kid, he had long since retired, but he had a finger that had somehow been lost by a miner in one of his mines, and he had it in a jar with formaldehyde, and it stayed in their like dining room. There's like the dining room like cupboard with like the fancy plates.
What a great place to put it.
My grandmother like hid it behind one of the plates, and one of like the it's so weird. One of like the rites of passage when I was a kid, my cousins and I would like sneak into the dining room and like pull it out and look at it. It was so gross. And then put it back real quick. But yeah, totally. My grandfather had somebody's finger. It wasn't his because he had all 10.
11 at one point. You don't know.
Could be. I want to think that, but yeah, some poor guy.
Yeah, it was a rough business that didn't pay very well and didn't protect its workers in the short or long term, and still really doesn't in a lot of ways.
Yeah, there's a miners on strike about 20 miles away from my house right now. And yeah. So good luck, guys. What was the inspiration for all the religious bits in the book? Not only for like the deep cuts with like Adam Warlock and Magus, but the inherent hypocrisy in the ways in which it made this world so much bigger I loved that aspect. What was your inspiration for including the Universal Church of Truth in the story? I remember
well,
you got into that a little bit, but were you already wanting
Yeah.
to go there?
I was actually. Again, when I came with this pitch, one of the things I talked about wanting to write about, and like I said, I grew up in Utah, so Mormonism is also a really sort of intrinsic part of the history here. And my editor at Marvel and I, actually, the first thing we sort of like bonded over as people was that we were both raised Mormons and are no longer part of the church, but sort of talking about that history and that foundation. And both of us have sort of a fascination with the way large religious groups can be both very exploitive to their population, but also can be like a tremendous source of strength and community and good, and how those two things can kind of exist within one organization. And so I came in saying, like, this is something that's always been interesting to me. When I think about the Old West, I always think about religion because of the Mormons, but also because that was a part of it. And that wherever people were traveling west, had these sort of like these preachers and these religions and these cults would also show up and take advantage of people in a lot of ways. So yeah, I went in saying, like, I would like to write about this, and I think this would be a cool element to have in it. On sort of the other side of the minors, we have this church, and one of the sisters kind of falls in with the church, and one of them falls in with the rebellion that's being led, or the strike that's being led against the mining corporation. And little did I know that the Universal Church of Truth already existed within the Marvel canon and gave me lots to work with.
When I first read it in the book, I was like, oh my gosh, she's going there. This is great.
It's been fun. Like, how many people who are like, again, and this is part of what's fun about these books and what's fun about the Marvel universe, is that you can be a casual fan. You can read this book and be like, I have no background about what the Universal Church of Truth is, but like, I get it. 2 pages in, I get this is a megalomaniacal church that's controlling people, and you can get that, or you can understand it in the bigger context. And it's been fun talking to people like you who are kind of comic book nerds and who've read the comics, and immediately the first thing they geek out about is like, you have the Universal Church of Truth in there, and the matriarch, and so it's been fun that people can experience that on sort of both levels.
Those deep cuts are always fun. And later on, I'm sure if somebody just absolutely just loved this book and wants to get further into the Marvel mythos, when they see stuff like that, they're like, holy crap, this is wow. So yeah, that was me nerding out. I really enjoyed it. Also, I really enjoyed the relationships in the book. You have many characters here who live hard lives, but occasionally we'll get glimpses of like some emotional depth and connection therein. Can you speak on how you go about bringing like the humanity to these characters that are so otherworldly and so different from, you or I? I mean, you are a grown human person.
I am a grown human person, and Nebula and Gamora are grown Zenwubian, and I can't remember Nebula. I was going to show off. I can't remember Nebula.
Hey, you got half of it out, and that blew my mind. So
starts with an L. I've been reading about this for a long time. I should remember it. So I think part of what makes Marvel a franchise that so many people, the whole world has really gotten into. Look, I'm going to bring this full circle. Is also part of the reason that so many people love Shakespeare. And the reason we still perform Shakespeare and talk about Shakespeare is because no matter what sort of set dressings surround them, the things that appeal to people and the things that people come back for are these universal human stories, and the emotional core at the center of these stories. Like Captain America's cool. We love Captain America. But I think what most people really stick around for with Captain America is a story of somebody who's nobody and who's skinny and scrawny, who then becomes this like incredible superhuman hero. And like, that's something we can think about, like, what if that happened to me? And that feels like I am also a scrawny nobody. What if I could have this impact on the world? And especially I think it's the relationships between the characters that keep people invested and keep people coming back for more, and that have really been the foundation for this extended universe that now exists. And so with Nebula and Gamora specifically, I've read a lot about trauma and about growing up in abusive households, and what happens when that's just your normal and that's your default and you don't know anything different. And how do you start to recognize that you have an abusive parent, and how do you start to recognize your trauma? Because when we see them in the movies, they've both recognized, like, we didn't grow up in a great stable environment. We were and this predates all that. Used and abused. Yeah. And so this happens before kind of we see them in the movies. And so I got to kind of go back and fill in the holes and say, okay, so when we see them, they're starting to work through this trauma, but what about before they recognize that this is the thing that had happened to them? And what is that moment of like recognizing that I've been abused my whole life, I've been pitted against my sister my whole life, not for any real reasons, but just to keep us from like recognizing how much stronger we'd be together and how much stronger we'd be as allies and how we could overpower this person who's abused us if we could just like trust each other. Those were the kind of like the core emotional beat that defined the characters and that defined the story. And I knew from the start I wanted to write about them recognizing, or how do I say this without spoiling too much, recognizing the foundational lies that had been, or the lies that had been the foundation of their upbringing, and then trying to challenge them and realizing that the trauma and the abuse goes so deep that they still can't.
Yeah, I get it. That's
like said that very carefully.
So I really enjoyed this book, and just it always blows my mind when somebody takes something like this. You know, it came from comic books, which for the longest was considered like low art, and now it's finally starting to get its due. And you have really smart grown adult humans who are very well educated writing books in that universe, and just kind of exploring those characters and shaping them and giving them more depth and humanity. In some cases, that means a lot. And being able to write this for I thought that was cool. Also, just it seemed like it was a bit different in terms of like the other YA stuff that I've read before. A little bit more deeper, had a little bit more to do with like relationships and emotions and stuff like that. What was your inspiration to go into YA writing?
I think it was so I was a big reader when I was a kid, but I don't think I was a very good reader. As I look back, I mostly read Star Wars novels, like the franchise Galactic Book Order novels. I also like came of age at this glorious time when I was too young when the prequels came out to realize they were garbage. And I was just so excited that there was more Star Wars that I just like loved the prequels and still really do. And one of the few the only time I will say I've ever been booed at a book event is when I stated that I loved the prequels, and nobody can take that away from me. And a room full of librarians booed me. Horrifying.
I've never seen a prequel film.
What?
Yeah,
it's terrible.
I was old enough at the time where I was like, "That's kid stuff. I don't care about Star Wars." And then when they, did the new ones, my daughter was, I think she had just turned 5. My oldest daughter had just turned 5, and she saw it and said, "Oh, there's a girl in there." So of course, Dad's going to take her to see Star Wars, and it was great. And we're on board now. But
I have the quickest sidebar story. So my sister and I were both Star Wars kids growing up and grew up idolizing Princess Leia, loved Leia. But then when the prequels came out, it was all about Padme because she's the only girl in the films. And I wanted my mother to make me, for Halloween every year, I was like, please make me a Padme dress. Please make me a Padme dress. And she never did, because they're obscenely complicated. They're beautiful, but obscenely complicated.
Talking like the Elizabethan looking.
Yeah, with like the big head
weird,
pieces or
and the geisha makeup kind of stuff.
Yeah, exactly. I wanted that so bad. And so I would always ask my mom, she's like, this is beyond my capabilities. And so we as a family went and saw the what's the first one? Not Last Jedi, Force Awakens. That was embarrassing. When we all went and saw the Force Awakens together, and as the credits are rolling, we're all sitting there talking about it. And my mom says, "I just love Rey." And I was like, "Yeah, Rey is great." Thinking we're going to have this great conversation about like representation in media and things like that. And my mom goes, "That costume is going to be so easy to make for so many moms across the country."
That's hilarious.
Like, you just coffee stain a bed sheet, rip it up, wrap your kid in it, and you're done. It's like, really? That's your take? She's like, I had to deal with Padme for years. Rey had one outfit the whole movie, and it would have been so easy to make. Like, okay, mother. Anyways, going way backwards though, to your original question. So I read a lot of Star Wars books when I was a kid, and that's kind of all I read. And then when I hit an age where, because young adult literature was not really a thing when I was growing up, I hit an age where you were sort of expected to graduate from reading kids' books into reading adult books, and especially like reading the adult books that were assigned to you in high school English classrooms. And I hated those, and I couldn't get through them, and I felt stupid every time I tried to pick one up, and just was not interested in them. So I decided I was not interested in books in general, and I just didn't like reading.
So naturally, you get a BFA in writing when you
exactly,
go to college.
Yeah, it's a natural progression. Well, so my BFA is actually in history because I wanted to be a historian, and so while I was doing my history, I really thought I was going to do a PhD and become an academic. And I actually lived in the UK for a little bit because I was studying the Wars of the Roses. And so while I was over there, I was traveling a lot and needed something to occupy me on all these trains, planes, and automobiles, and was sort of like, what are these bookstores things that are in all these airports and transportation hubs? Maybe I'll try one of them. So I started reading again, and reading books that I chose as opposed to reading books that were assigned to me, and was like, these are fine. This is fun. I like this. And then through sort of chance, ended up picking up some books that I had read as a kid and really loved as a kid, and I did read the Star Wars books all over again, but not Star Wars books, other books, and just had this like mind-blowing moment of like, oh my gosh, like these books made me the person I am. And I didn't realize that. And I'd completely forgotten. Like it's weird how things can exist and be a part of you, and you don't sort of recognize where that part came from until years and years later when you sort of encounter it again. And so I felt like reading the books of my childhood kind of like made me more in tune with who I was as an adult. And then as a result of that, I started reading a lot of YA, because YA was a fairly new genre at the time, and really liked it, and felt like these are kind of the fun coming of age stories. I love coming of age stories. I feel like we all feel like we're coming of age all the time. That's like, we never ever feel like we have it figured out. And so I think YA is really universal in that sense, and that we all feel like we're messing it up and figuring it out as we go. And I love YA because it's just a little less self-serious than a lot of adult literature is. There's some inherent, I think, melodrama just in the way that teenagers experience the world. Like everything happens on a huge scale when you're a teenager. And that's just the nature of being a teenager. You're like, I think about like the way I had friendships as a teenager. I was obsessed with my friends, and was obsessed with sitting up in a car at midnight at the football field talking about like things that I thought were so deep and philosophical at the time. Like those feelings are so big when you're a teenager that it lends itself, I think, so well to fiction, and creates this like real exciting emotional moment in your life to ground these stories in. And also I think YA is exciting and fun because as a teenager, you're experiencing so many things for the first time. And so there's a sort of, you lose the sort of jaded hardness of adult literature in a lot of senses.
Hey, sorry about that. My kids just got home.
That was all I had to say. Well timed.
Yeah. So, yeah, that being that age and having all those experiences for the first time, it really does lend itself to a lot of drama and a lot of good questions and stuff to talk about. That's cool. How do you get into your creative mode?
Oh, I really don't. Like, when this is your job, you just kind of have to do it.
Really, you're in that like the mindset of like, I'm gonna sit down my computer, I'm gonna bang out a few pages and get it done.
I mean, yes and no. I think I hate to take away the romance of writing novels, but yeah, for me there are lots of days where I'm like, okay, I got a deadline, so I don't feel like writing today. I don't feel inspired, but I got to bang out 1,500 words in order to hit my deadline. And then there's other days that I'm like, oh my God, I'm on fire. This is the greatest thing anyone's ever written. The muse is speaking to me. And usually when I go back and reread what I've written, I can't tell the difference between those two things.
Really?
Like for me, so much of writing is just like getting words on the page. And I think that's what, when I talk to aspiring novelists or aspiring writers, so many of them, their biggest barricade is just getting the words on the page. And so many people, have whole worlds that exist in their head, and they come up with these great stories. And sometimes they start writing them and they get about 10,000 words in. And then you hit the first plot hole, and then it gets kind of hard. And you're like, oh my gosh, this is, it's not as fun as it was. The momentum's kind of worn off. And then they get another idea and they're like, oh, okay, well, that one seems better. That one's easy and new, and it's never going to betray me like this one did. And it's never going to get hard. And then you start writing that one, and then about 10,000 words in, the same thing happens. And so I really think that as a novelist, the best thing you can do is finish what you start and just develop a habit of completing your project and learning to write when you don't feel creative and learning to write when you don't feel like the muse is sitting beside you, or even like, I think a lot of people fall back on like, okay, I get asked a lot about like writing rituals. Like you have like a certain drink or a certain music or a certain whatever. And I'm like, yeah, there are my preferred places to write and I have preferred conditions to write under. But at the end of the day, like I have to get work done. And so sometimes I have to write in an airport. Sometimes I have to write without my favorite pair of slippers or whatever the thing is. And I think being a real artist and a real creative person is learning to produce under all circumstances. And like I said, I don't want to make it sound unromantic because it's wonderful and it's great. And it's such a great job and such an incredibly fun thing to get to do. But I think even the most fun jobs, there are days you drag yourself in and you're like, I don't want to be here today.
Yeah. At the end of the day, it's still a job.
Yeah, it is still a job. It's how I pay my rent and how I pay my bills. And so there are lots of practical factors to take into consideration. And I think if I sat around waiting for my creative mood to strike, I'd never write anything.
Yeah.
And I also think there's a myth of like feeling like you're going to be ready at some point, whether it's ready to start writing your first book, or I always, when I'm doing historical research in preparation for writing something historical, I always wait for the moment I feel like I know enough about the time period to feel like I'm ready to sit down and start writing. And the truth is you never feel ready. And so part of it is you just have to learn kind of to start before you're ready and realize that it's not going to be perfect. You're going to have to work things out as you go. You're going to have to change things. You're going to have to change course. You're going to have to change your plot points. But the most important thing is you have to start it.
Yeah. Yeah. While you're writing, do you listen to music or anything like that to kind of get
I do
into the zone?
I do. I make playlists for every book.
Oh, really?
That are sort of like, some of them are more atmospheric playlists. Like I'm trying to think. I haven't listened to my Gamora and Nebula playlists in a while, because I also then listen to them so much I get so sick of them, and I'm like, well, I can never listen to any of these songs again. This is riveting. You can cut this out later on your on your podcast. So this had the Gamora and Nebula podcast had a lot of kind of folksier stuff on it. Like I had some traditional, like Down to the River to Pray and Leaning on the Everlasting Arm, and those kind of like traditional Western folk songs and hymns and things like that. I had a lot of like the Lumineers and the Highwomen, and then also things like, I'm trying to find the most, Boss Bitch by Doja Cat is also on here. So we contain multitudes.
I was thinking like a mix between like Woody Guthrie and like trap pop, like trap music and what is it? The dumb techno music and like where they mix that,
like house electronica. Yeah. I'm a big musical theater nerd, and I always end up listening to, books like attach themselves to different musicals in my head, even if they're totally unrelated. And I often will listen to the same musical soundtrack like over and over and over again.
What's your jam?
For Gamora and Nebula, it was a musical called Hadestown, which was actually one of the things I put on my vision board for my initial pitch to Marvel, because it's the reimagining of the myth of Orpheus and Eurydice set in this sort of like Dust Bowl jazz age New Orleans town where hell is at the end of a railroad line that leads to this mining town where they're mining forever and they're always building this wall. And so that was one of the things I'd just seen the show when I pitched the book to Marvel, and it was really on my mind. And then I ended up just like binging the soundtrack over. It totally messes up my Spotify top 100 at the end of the year. But that one actually makes sense. There's other books that I'm like, I'm writing this book about I don't know, the 1700s, and I can't stop listening to Jesus Christ Superstar. Like they don't always make sense. Sometimes my brain just, for some reason, latches on. And I think I like with the musicals and the sung through musicals, I like the storytelling and the propulsion of the story through the music and the high emotion of the music, and those things I think subconsciously affect me and subconsciously put me in the right headspace for it.
I'm in a microscope all day at work, so it's really insular. I'm just sitting at my desk in my microscope, and I'll listen to podcasts. But lately, I've been listening to musicals, and I'll listen to the entirety of Assassins. The other day, I
love Assassins.
Fan-flippin-tastic. I love that.
Genius. Sondheim is. I mean, it's not a controversial opinion to say Sondheim is a genius, but that one in particular, there was like over COVID, there was like a special for the anniversary of it that they talked to Stephen Sondheim and a bunch of the actors and people who've worked on the different iterations of that shows. And I remember somebody talking about how if you listen all the different songs by each of the assassins, the like way the song is structured is rooted in folk music, American folk music of the time. And like, it's such a great, fantastic show.
It can be heartbreaking sometimes.
Yeah.
Just listening, like their backstories were, I mean, no flipping wonder.
I mean,
yeah,
if we want to tell this
good.
back to Marvel, if you want to talk about humanizing villains and humanizing people who do really, really terrible things. And you asked earlier about the comics I read. My favorite one that I read for research was a comic about Thanos, actually, and about Thanos' sort of misspent youth, and in particular his friendship with this personification of death, and how he sort of becomes obsessed with this idea of chaos and life, order and death, that then becomes the defining terms of his life, and that leads him for the Infinity Stones and all of this. And I loved this comic because not only are we looking at sort of the backstories of these two heartless assassin women, we're also looking at the backstory of the abusive tyrant who made them that way.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I love, by the way, that you went to his original muse in the book. I don't want to get too much deeper than that, but I loved the movies. I thought that the Guardians of the Galaxy films were great, and I thought that the Endgame and all that, I thought everything, they landed it right. And I understand why they wouldn't have his original muse in the films, because it's kind of different. But yeah, exactly. I appreciated that you picked that up and ran with it.
I'm glad.
Yeah, it was so well done. Do you have anything so obviously this is out now, right?
It is available wherever books are sold.
So Gamora and Nebula, Sisters in Arms. You also have the Loki book, and God, you have one of them, the Gentleman's Guide to Vice and Virtue, the Lady's Guide to Petticoats and Piracy. Holy smokes, you have a ton of great books. And do you have anything else that you're working on that we need to know about?
So I've got one more book with Marvel coming out in September of 2022. We're rounding this out with a trilogy of stories. And before you ask, because I've been asked at every interview, I cannot say who it's about. The red Marvel sniper dot would appear on my forehead if I dared to reveal any details about it. But I'm working on that right now, and that'll be out next year. So there will be 3 books in this sort of like Marvel anti-hero series. And then I also, so you've mentioned, I wrote a series of historical adventure novels featuring characters that have traditionally not gotten to helm those kind of adventure novels. The first one's called The Gentleman's Guide to Vice and Virtue. The second one's The Lady's Guide to Petticoats and Piracy. And the third one called The Nobleman's Guide to Scandal and Shipwrecks. And it is out in November.
Oh, nice. Oh my gosh. Yeah. You don't sleep, do you?
Oh no, I sleep plenty. sleep too much waiting for that creative muse to set in.
That's awesome. So what do you take in, like when you're not writing? Because you can't just throw stuff out there constantly without getting anything back to be inspired by and to sate your need to be entertained. So what are you into now?
Oh gosh, what am I into right now? I mean, I when I'm working really, I go through periods where I work really intensely on something, and then I'll have sort of a month where I'm just like relaxing, and I'm just coming off like a really intense period of work. So, and I'm doing promo for this book, so I haven't been consuming a ton of media lately. I'm trying to think of things I'm into. I'm reading a book series called The Rivers of London. The first one's called The Midnight Riot. I can't remember the author's name, but they're a British crime procedural series that then has magic in it. So it's a little cool. Doctor Who. They're really fun. They're very British, which I really, and I'm enjoying the crap out of those. Like they're fun, funny reads, and they have a lot of sort of things in common with British writers like Terry Pratchett and Douglas Adams. And,
I love. Okay, so say no more.
I love. It's that certain sensibility that I just adore. So I've been really, really enjoying those books lately. I promise I do things other than read books, but another book series that I've just been obsessed with for the past year is Gideon the Ninth by Tamsin Muir, and its sequel Hera the Ninth, which is the log line of them is lesbian necromancers in space, but really they're just like so much weirder than that, and they're so off the wall and just like fantasy like I've never read before. And you get
awesome.
dropped in this world that you have no idea what's going on, but it's so fun and gross, and I love it. So yeah, I've been reading a lot of things. I just watched the television show Hacks on HBO Max, which I really enjoyed.
Flipping hilarious.
It was so great.
I'm like 2 episodes behind, I think, but yeah, really enjoyed it.
I was very pleasantly surprised by how much I liked it and how often it made me laugh out loud, like actually LOL. And then, I mean, this is a very on-brand answer, but I've been enjoying the crap out of the Loki series that's on Disney Plus right now. Oh my gosh, it's fantastic. And I had a brief interaction on the internet with the creator of it, Kate Herron. Somehow it's one of those things where I was like, okay, so the book doesn't tie into the series. The book came out like 2 years ago. I didn't know anything about the series before it came out. It didn't even know what was happening. And so it's not like the book, my Loki is not a tie-in to the TV show, but she and I must be on some kind of similar wavelength, because it's very much like, if you like the TV show, you will also like the Loki book. We have very, very similar sensibilities. There's sort of a time travel element. There's even a like fight on a train, which I was like, Loki with a hot blonde on a train, which is like a very niche Venn diagram I didn't expect to hit with the TV show. But I've loved the show. I've loved it. I mentioned this, I love the Doctor Who kind of sensibility of it.
It's very Doctor Who. It's very Doctor Who, and I love that. And like Doctor Who before Stephen Moffat got involved and made everything way too complicated. And I loved WandaVision. I thought WandaVision was absolutely phenomenal. And the fact that Marvel is like, hey, we're doing this new thing. We're trying this new format of these shows. And they come out of the gate with this big swing of, we are going to talk about grief and trauma through the lens of sitcoms. Like, yes, I'm like, how, as someone who knows how hard it is to get things approved at Marvel, I'm like, how on earth did you get this? Like, how did you pitch this and get this approved? And then they pull it off in just an absolutely gorgeous way. I really loved WandaVision, and I was a little skeptical about the shows. I kind of was like, I don't know if I need more. I love that Marvel's diversifying across content, because now there's so many different ways. Whichever way you enjoy your media, you can now enjoy these stories that way. And I didn't know if the TV shows were going to be for me. And man, WandaVision came out swinging. I am such a fan. I was very impressed by that show, and I appreciate they stuck to like the sitcom length format. Yeah. But yeah, it's great. And on the Loki show, I keep calling it the Loki show. I mean, it's just called Loki, so there's no like, WandaVision's like such a catchy name, and it's just like Loki. When I call it the Loki show, it makes me think like he should be wearing like a Bill Cosby sweater or something. He is one of the sitcoms that Wanda actually visits. Exactly. But I really enjoy his dialogue in the show. And there's like a massive distinction between, how he talks and his, his diction, how he phrases things. And then, everyone else. He stands out, but it's believable. He's, actor is, I'm terrible with actors' names, but he's incredible. Really good job. Yeah. I've enjoyed in general the progression of Loki as a character and sort of the MCU and the sort of wider world of Marvel, where I think when we first saw him in Thor and we first saw him in Avengers even, he's a very kind of self-serious character and has this sort of, they're talking about, his trauma and his power thirst and his like sibling complex, like these really serious things about him, which all are part of his character. And then you have Taika Waititi come in, who I'm such a huge fan of Taika Waititi. I have been a fan of his since before Ragnarok, and really I think Ragnarok was such a turning point for Marvel in terms of like really embracing the sort of inherent silliness of superheroes, and the inherent absurdity there, while still taking the story very seriously and taking its characters. Like the balance of that is perfect. And I think Taika Waititi is the perfect filmmaker to do that. And so seeing Loki get to be kind of a goofier character in that, and leaning into even a little bit more the flamboyance and the gender fluidity, and he's just like that surprised me that they went there and go for it. I love it. Yeah. I was also delighted by that. One of my favorite things on Tumblr I've ever seen is when
at the beginning of Ragnarok when Loki's in disguise as Odin, and someone on Tumblr had written like the hypothetical dialogue should have been that Loki's like, how did you know it was me? And Thor's like, you were watching theater in your fancy silk bathrobe. You
yeah.
Like, it's like, yeah.
It has.
So the fact that we've now hit this incredible balance in the show where Loki gets to be his sort of like dramatic, flamboyant, theatrical self while also being a serious character and like having this like real relationship with his mother and his relationship with his family is so like central to I'm really excited about the show, and I don't know when this podcast will air, but I'm so excited to see where they go with it.
We have like 3 more episodes left.
I know. It's not enough. How are we halfway through?
My kids wouldn't go to bed last night, so I couldn't watch all the new one. I was like, oh my gosh, y'all just please.
I am both single and childless, so I watch Loki whenever I want. My brain wakes me up at like 7 a.m. on Wednesday mornings, in spite of having like I'm self-employed. I could watch it whenever I want. My brain will literally like wake up and be like, "Hey, time to watch Loki at 7 a.m."
And your dog's like, "Mom,
can't think about anything else." Well, my dog is. She does get to go outside first, but she's also I have a Saint Bernard. Yeah, she's half asleep at all times though, so she's very in favor of anything that keeps us in bed for longer, which is usually what the Loki TV shows.
Well, Mackenzie, I've really enjoyed talking to you. Thank you so much for coming on and talking about Gamora and Nebula, Sisters in Arms. You guys go out, find this book, Mackenzie Lee, Gamora and Nebula, Sisters in Arms. Yeah. I enjoyed the hell out of it. And I can't wait to read the new book that you can't talk about because, yeah. So you said a sniper is involved, maybe. So, no, I'm sure.
The sniper on the other side. The sniper
the Marvel sniper.
Me down from the other side of my living room being like, don't you say it. Don't say it.
I'm still going to speculate that it, no, I'm joking. Thank
sniper
you.
Doesn't really narrow it down. That could be
pretty much anybody.
Just about any of them.
But I think Mr. Frank Castle might have no, I'm joking. Well, thank you again so much. And by all means, next year in November 2022, hit us up.
September. Yeah, September. This was wonderful.
I enjoyed it.
Thank you so much for having me. This was
Thank
great.
you for coming on. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening. And I'm going to go upstairs and make some dinner for some kids that are
perfect.
That are yelling at me. So
I'm going to make some dinner for a dog who's staring at me.
Mackenzie, thank you again. And we'll shoot you a message when this goes up, and I'll tag you in all the stuff and make sure.
Please do.
People see this book because it's fantastic.
This was so great. Thank you so much. This is
awesome.
One of the best conversations I've had for this book.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much. You have a good one, and we'll see you next year.
Yes, definitely.
Spaghetti! And we're back.
That's right. We are back. Back in the saddle again. Well, I hope you guys really, really enjoyed that as much as we did making it for you. And if you like what you heard and you want to hear more, you got to go check out spoilerverse.com, because at spoilerverse.com, we have a plethora amazing directors and artists of all walks of life, and editors and writers, and oh my God, are you a lover of comic books like we are? Then there's so many amazing people from the comic book world over at spoilerverse.com, and I highly implore you to go there and check it out.
Yeah, and while you're there, you can check out all the other podcasts on our network, like Bridget and the Geekdoms and Funny Book Forensics and Haphazard Adventures and Nerds from the Crypt and so many more.
Misery
we put out
Point
episodes
Radio.
all the time. Go check all of them out, and check out all of the reviews and previews and articles we have going up every single day for you, every day on spoilerverse.com for you to check out and to read and to love and to like and to comment. We have a store link. If you want to help support the site, you can do it 2 ways. One, go to our Patreon, which is patreon.com/spoilercountry, or go to our store link in the middle of the site there and get a t-shirt, a face mask, a hoodie, something, look fly as hell, and help support the site when you do that, because we get $1 or $2. And, maybe you want to talk to us. If you do, you can do it obviously on all the socials, but if you go to scpod.us/Discord, you can join our public Discord server and come chat with us all day long.
I couldn't say it better myself, dude.
There you go.
You just mouthed out a ton of information at once, and really, I hope you guys enjoy what you're hearing, because we're working our butts off to bring it to you.
We are.
I guess there's only one left thing. Yeah, I'm going to go with it. There's only one thing left to do.
What's that?
In an oceans of podcasts, we are Cthulhu. As Cthulhu compels you to open the mind and read more.
Do you listen to podcasts that sound like this? Hey, welcome back to the Super OK Podcast, where our audio sounds mediocre.
Or do you prefer podcasts that sound more like this? Crisp, clear, fun, easy to listen to, and full of awesomeness? Well, then you should check out Spoiler Country, hosted exclusively over at spoilerverse.com.